All right, it's not really very likely that you would be able to secure a divorce in colonial New England. But again, because they need to ensure uh, domestic, peace, make sure they don't get the wrath of God, they did allow. There were some conditions that they allowed for divorce. Over the course of like 50 years, though, there were only like 25 divorces that happened. So, we're talking like one every other year. Really, really rare. You could get a divorce if in cases of desertion. And typically this meant it's not necessarily that somebody deserted somebody. Often it was the man that deserted the woman. Usually probably what happened is he had died, right? He maybe had gone over to England. Maybe he was a shopkeeper. He'd gone to England to get supplies. It takes 6 months. Sorry, it takes 3 months to get to England. And then it's going to take another 3 months to get back. So it's a 6-month journey. And that doesn't include like the time you're going to spend in England getting the stuff you need. So you could be gone for easily a year. This is, again, you'll later in the module we're going to talk about deputy husbands. This is the reason for deputy husbands, because people could be gone for a long time. You can't just have things stop. So in all likelihood, it wasn't desertion. Probably the person died. They really want to make sure that this person is dead, though. You cannot get a divorce for desertion until 7 years. It has to be 7 years that the person has not been there, and then you could secure a divorce for desertion. And again, you want to think like why, and of course the reason why is they want women producing children. The Puritan population, the New England population, is going to reproduce itself every 25 years. So again, think about that in relation to what we talked about in Virginia, where you have that really high death rate. New England population is reproducing. It's doubling itself every 25 years. Okay, so desertion was one reason for divorce. You could get a divorce if there is failure to provide. Failure to provide could mean somebody's out drinking, gambling, right? It can mean financially, but failure to provide could also mean that a woman is failing to provide children, which we know might not actually be her fault. You could also get a divorce for multiple marriages if they found out that the person was married to somebody else. And you could get divorced for adultery. Now, adultery is defined in this way. When a married man has sex outside of marriage with a married woman, that's adultery. In colonial Massachusetts, it's a capital offense, meaning you could be executed for. We don't have any surviving records of anybody being executed for adultery, but in theory, that's what's written into the law. If a married man has sex outside of marriage with a single woman, that's the crime of fornication, which is not a capital offense. It was usually lashes on the bare back and perhaps a fine. What about a woman? If a woman has sex outside of marriage with a married man, adultery. But if a woman has sex outside of marriage with a single man, it's also adultery. So it's always adultery, always a capital offense for her if she's married, but only a capital offense for him if he commits the crime of adultery with another married woman. Now, sometimes students ask, what would happen if he has sex outside of marriage with a single woman and she gets pregnant? Well, she can actually sue for child support. And again, this isn't because the Puritans are all about, like, yay, single parents. This is because they don't want her to become a burden on the community. They want to ensure that she's being taken care of because they don't want to get God's wrath if she's going hungry. So the way this works is she will go before the court before she gives birth and make an oath as to who the father is. So she'll go before the court before she gives birth and says, John Doe is the father of my child. Then, when she goes into labor, Puritans believed at the height of a woman's labor, she could not lie. So the midwife would, at the height of a woman's labor, ask her, who is the father of your child? Having survived childbirth and doing childbirth with no medication or drugs, I would agree that you probably could have asked me anything at the height of my labor, and I probably would have told you anything you wanted to know. So I'm not too sure if the Puritans were too far off here. So the midwife would ask at the height of a woman's labor, who is the father of the child? She would say John Doe. And then the midwife would go to court and swear that the father was John Doe. And the court would accept those words. They couldn't challenge it. He had to pay child support. So this is another way, one of the things we're kind of looking at here is like ways we can see women having agency where they don't really have agency. This midwife had agency, right? Although, again, midwife is going to be a tricky, a tricky role because this can also sometimes get her suspected of witchcraft. But in this instance, it's giving her a little bit of agency because the court's going to believe whatever it is she says. Okay, if you have any questions, you can leave those in the discussion board.